Welcome to Lifespan, the weekly podcast that digs up the dirt on the most outrageous, chaotic, and downright WTF lives ever lived. Forget what you learned in school. This is history's unhinged side. Today, wow, you're in for a truly bizarre journey into the world of Uri Geller. You know, the spoon-bending enigma who pretty much captivated the 20th century.
Oh, absolutely. A figure who, well, depending on how you look at the testimonies, was either interacting with reality in ways we just don't understand yet, or maybe presenting illusions with just remarkable skill. This whole bizarre journey, it really makes you think about what convinces us and why.
It really does. And what's so mind-blowing about Geller is this huge question right at the center. Was he a genuine psychic? Maybe even, involved with intelligence agencies during all that Cold War paranoia.
Or was he just a really, really charismatic magician, pulling off these incredibly elaborate tricks right under everyone's noses?
Exactly. Or, and this is where our bizarre journey takes a real turn. Could it have been something even stranger? I mean, we're talking about someone who got millions believing things that on the surface seem completely unbelievable.
Yeah, and you absolutely have to picture the backdrop for all this. The 1970s, such a unique time.
Right.
You had disco, this dazzling spectacle, but underneath there was this really palpable fear, suspicion, fueled by the Cold War.
Totally.
And television was just exploding, becoming this incredibly powerful force, connecting people, creating these shared experiences, shared personalities. It just created this environment where someone like Geller could absolutely capture the collective imagination.
That era definitely had this, suspicious vibe hanging over it, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. The CIA actually had Project Stargate. They were actively looking into ESP, psychic warriors, all that stuff.
Right, they were taking it serious, or at least investigating it seriously.
And there was this massive surge in New Age beliefs, people exploring all sorts of non-traditional ideas. It almost feels like the perfect storm, the perfect conditions for someone claiming extraordinary abilities to just pop up.
It really does. It was a period where these sort of accepted boundaries of what was possible felt, well, a bit more fluid. And right into that steps Uri Geller, making some truly extraordinary claims for you to consider.
Yeah, extraordinary is maybe putting it mildly. So, okay, for anyone just joining this bizarre journey, Geller's main claims were pretty out there. He said he could bend metal objects, spoons, keys, that kind of thing, seemingly just with his mind, no physical force.
That was the big one.
And he claimed he could read minds, transmit thoughts over huge distances. And even that he was involved in, like psychic espionage.
These are the claims that grabbed all the headlines, right? Propelled him to international stardom. And naturally, they led to this really intense debate, which gives us the different theories that still kind of swirl around him today. Maybe let's start by looking at the idea that he actually possessed genuine psychic abilities.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that first possibility. People who lean this way, they often point out that Geller's abilities were supposedly tested under scientific conditions. Now, scientific here, that needs a bit of a closer look, but attempts were definitely made to study him.
Precisely. And probably one of the most cited bits of info supporting this theory, it comes from those declassified CIA files.
Right, the Stanford Research Institute one.
Exactly. Back in 1973 at SRI, Geller did these ESP tests. And according to the documents, the tests yielded, well, they called them strange results.
Strange results.
But it's really important for you to understand the interpretation of those results is far from settled. Skeptics, for instance, they often point out the experimental controls might not have been, as rigorous as they needed to be.
But that does bring up a really interesting point for you to think about. If he was just a trickster, just doing magic tricks, why would intelligence agencies, especially during the Cold War, such a tense time, why would they even bother with him? What could they possibly gain?
That's a key question, definitely, for those who believe in his abilities. The thinking is, intelligence pros, they're usually a pretty cautious bunch. They probably wouldn't waste time and resources on someone they strongly suspected was a fake.
Makes sense.
However, the opposing view, that leads us straight into our second major theory in this bizarre journey. Geller as a highly skilled magician.
Right, and you absolutely cannot talk about that without bringing in James Randi.
The amazing Randi. Yeah.
Legendary magician himself and a professional skeptic.
Yeah.
Just relentless in debunking paranormal claims. Randi became Geller's biggest, most vocal critic. He was totally convinced all of Geller's feats were just clever sleight of hand.
And that any scientific tests were flawed, basically because they didn't have tight enough controls to stop trickery. Randy's whole point was that really masterful magic can look exactly like the paranormal if you don't know what you're looking for. He argued Geller's spoon bending, for example, could be done with all sorts of sneaky techniques.
Like what?
Oh, like secretly pre-bending the spoons or using misdirection, slight muscle movements during the performance. Things you just wouldn't notice unless you were, like, trained to spot them.
Okay. And that brings us to that really famous, or maybe infamous, 1973 appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Ah, yes. Pivotal moment.
And Carson, crucially, used to be a magician himself. So he knew the tricks of the trade.
Right. He was savvy.
So he had Randy basically prepare the props beforehand, set it up specifically to prevent Geller from using any of his usual methods. And what happened?
Well, Geller just seemed to completely falter. Couldn't bend the spoon, couldn't seem to do the mind-reading stuff.
And he blamed it on bad vibes, right?
Yeah, famously blamed the negative energy or bad vibes in the studio. That moment, you can imagine, became Exhibit A for skeptics like Randy.
Yeah, it must have been.
Randy felt it just clearly showed that when Geller couldn't control the setup, the props, his alleged powers just vanished. And that bad vibes excuse, it became kind of a running gag in their feud.
And it wasn't just some polite disagreement, was it? Their feud was like decades long.
Yeah.
Very public.
Oh, it was intense. Like you said, think Batman versus Joker, but with bent spoons and skepticism instead of batarangs. Randy really dedicated a huge chunk of his life to trying to expose Geller.
But Geller always denied it, right?
Yeah.
Consistently just said, nope, it's real.
Always. Flatly denied any trickery.
Yeah.
And that persistent denial, that absolute self-assurance, even when things went wrong publicly, like on Carson, that just adds to the whole mystery surrounding him.
Definitely. But okay, beyond real psychic and master magician, there's this third idea, maybe even more compelling. This part of the bizarre journey, Geller as a potential psyop asset, or maybe even a target.
Okay, yeah, now we're stepping into, let's say, more conspiratorial territory.
Which, honestly, kind of fits the whole 70s vibe and Geller's story perfectly, do you think? The idea here is maybe Geller wasn't, like, acting entirely alone.
Exactly. Some people speculate that different intelligence agencies could be Mossad, CIA, MI5, who knows, might have actually used Geller, used him as a tool in their own Cold War psychic experiments.
Wow.
The thinking is maybe his seemingly impossible feats could have been strategically deployed for, like, espionage or psychological operations, psyops, using someone unusual to influence people psychologically.
That's a pretty wild concept to get your head around. But then there's also the flip side argument, isn't there?
Yeah.
That maybe his huge fame, and sometimes, let's face it, pretty outlandish performances, might have been deliberately amplified, but to actually discredit real psychic research.
Right. By associating the whole paranormal field with someone so theatrical, maybe so controversial, it could have made serious researchers look less credible. Kind of disinformation tactic.
That's a very cynical but, wow, fascinating angle for you to consider.
And then there are also theories floating around that if the Soviets had their own psychics, as many believed back then, they would have been intensely interested in Geller, watching him, trying to figure him out, maybe even counteract him.
It just paints this picture of this whole shadowy world, doesn't it?
Right.
Espionage, the paranormal, all tangled up.
It does. And the one really undeniable fact in all the speculation, the thing that sort of grounds it a bit.
The paperwork.
The paperwork. Geller was involved in CIA-funded psychic experiments. We know that happened at SRI. That one fact, it just adds this significant layer of, okay, what was really going on here for you to ponder?
Yeah, it really does. It confirms that at least some people in the intelligence world saw something, enough potential or maybe just enough mystery to investigate him.
Whether he was a willing participant or maybe an unwitting pawn or something else entirely, that's still a huge part of the enigma.
And somehow, despite all the skepticism, all the controversies, Geller just managed to stay famous for decades.
He really did. Wasn't just a flash in the pan.
No. He was on international TV constantly, appearing in everything from, like, serious documentaries to these incredibly bizarre Japanese game shows.
He truly became a global household name, and his influence, as you'll see, it actually seeped into pop culture in some really unexpected ways.
Oh, the pop culture stuff is amazing. I mean, the Pokemon Kadabra, apparently inspired by him.
Yeah.
And then Geller actually sued Nintendo over it back in 2000. You can't make this stuff up.
No, you really can't. It's such a clear sign of his lasting impact, though, on the popular consciousness.
Totally.
And it's not just Pokemon. Even modern street magicians, guys like David Blaine, Chris Angel,
Yeah.
they've kind of acknowledged Geller as a sort of forerunner, someone who helped pave the way for their style of magic and spectacle.
Right. Blending illusion and that kind of mystique. And you think about shows like Netflix's Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah.
With all the government psychic experiments, the weird happenings, you can totally see the echoes of that whole Geller era, that 70s vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. That fascination with the unexplained that was so big in the 70s and 80s, it's a huge part of that show's whole feel. And Geller was right in the middle of that cultural moment for so many people.
And he hasn't exactly faded away, has he? Even recently, Geller keeps making headlines with some truly unique claims.
He does indeed.
I mean, the guy claimed he telepathically helped with Brexit negotiations in the 2010s.
That's certainly a bold claim for you to consider.
Right. And then in 2020, he demanded the UK government stop rolling out 5G towers because he thought they harmed the Earth's biofield.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he hasn't exactly retreated into quiet retirement.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And have you seen pictures of his house now? It's this mansion shaped like an eye.
I have seen those, yes. Quite something.
Which is weird enough, but then there's a Cadillac literally planted upside down in his garden and a statue covered in spoons. It's like the physical manifestation of his entire bizarre journey.
It's a surreal landscape, all right. Perfectly mirrors the surreal nature of his career for you to contemplate. And speaking of surreal, maybe we should dive into some of the lesser-known stuff, the real WTF trivia.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Hit me with the deep cuts. What other unbelievable stories are out there for us?
Okay, well, how about this? Back in 1974, he was actually brought to NASA.
The NASA, seriously.
Yep. And none other than astronaut Edgar Mitchell walked on the moon, Apollo 14. He personally evaluated Geller's abilities.
An astronaut who walked on the moon tested the spoon bender.
It really is something to picture. Now, the findings, as usual with Geller, inconclusive, open to interpretation for you to consider.
Of course.
But just the fact that NASA, even kind of unofficially through Mitchell, took an interest, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, wow. What else?
Then there's the time Geller claimed he psychically stopped Big Ben.
Stopped Big Ben. The clock tower.
The clock tower. And the clock did actually stop, which he pointed to as proof. But, hilariously, apparently tons of other clocks stopped around the same time. Probably just a power surge.
Oh, the irony. So maybe his psychic powers just affected, like, the entire power grid momentarily.
Perhaps. And then you have his remote viewing attempts.
Right, where he tries to draw what's in a sealed envelope.
Well, exactly. You try to sketch the hidden image. And sometimes his sketches did actually show some resemblance to the target pictures.
So, chance, clever guessing, or something else.
The eternal question for you, right? The debate just goes on.
You absolutely have to mention his early work with that parapsychologist, Indrija Puhoric. That relationship sounds like something straight out of, I don't know, an X-File.
It truly does. Puhoric became this incredibly staunch believer. He wrote these books claiming Geller wasn't just psychic, but was actually an emissary, like a messenger.
For aliens.
Pretty much. An extraterrestrial intelligence Puhoric called Spectra. So, yeah, we're not just talking bent forks here. We're potentially into intergalactic diplomacy.
From silverware to the stars. That's quite a leap, assuming you buy it. And what about the Mossad connection whispers?
Ah, yes. There are these sort of anecdotal stories suggesting Mossad might have used Geller sometimes, maybe trying to influence foreign diplomats psychically.
Yeah.
Again, these are really hard to confirm definitively, very murky, but they just add another layer of intrigue to that whole Geller and intelligence agencies angle for you to ponder.
It just keeps getting weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
And one of the most fascinating bits of trivia, for me anyway, is what happened after his live TV appearances in the UK.
Ah, yes. The Great Spoon and Watch Deluge.
Exactly. Tell us about that.
Well, apparently, after Geller would go on TV and claim he could psychically affect objects in viewers' homes right then and there, the BBC would just get flooded with mailbags full of bent spoons, broken watches, stuff people claimed had been affected during the broadcast. It's just this amazing illustration of, well, maybe the power of suggestion or collective belief or just collective participation in this weird phenomenon for you to observe. It's bizarre.
It's just wild. So, okay, as we try to sort of wrap our heads around this whole bizarre journey, what are the main takeaways about Uri Geller for you?
You know, ultimately, his story, it really serves as this captivating study, a study in the power of belief, The allure of the extraordinary, definitely the power of charisma, and that really blurry line sometimes between illusion and actual influence.
Exactly. Was he just a charlatan who got lucky, hitting the zeitgeist just right, capitalizing on a time ripe for belief?
Or was he genuinely psychic, with
I
abilities that science just, couldn't quite grasp or measure
Or
properly?
was he, like those theories suggest, some kind of pawn? Caught up in the secret games of the Cold War? These are all the questions for you to chew on.
And the truth, it just seems elusive. Still, after all these decades of people watching him, testing him, trying to debunk him, a definitive answer to the Uri Geller enigma, it still kind of escapes us.
But, okay, regardless of the actual truth, whatever that might be, one thing is absolutely undeniable for you. Uri Geller grabbed the world's attention, like few others.
Unquestioned.
He made millions of people question the limits of what's possible, even if just for a little while.
And maybe, just maybe, that's his most enduring legacy for you to reflect upon. He sort of held up a mirror to our own deep-seated desire to believe, right? To find wonder, even magic in the everyday world, even when faced with something that seems utterly impossible.
But that's a really insightful way to put it. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Even today, how easily can our own beliefs be shaped? By charismatic people, by the cultural currents around us. It's definitely something for you to think about long after this bizarre journey into Uri Geller's life comes to an end.